She didn't belong there. Every woman in that ballroom had a driver, a stylist, a last name that opened doors. Clara Whitmore had a borrowed dress, a broken zipper held by a safety pin, and a library card she'd accidentally grabbed instead of her ID. But the moment she stepped through those gold doors soaked from the rain, one man stopped talking mid-sentence. He wasn't supposed to notice someone like her. She wasn't supposed to exist in his world. But Vincenzo Moretti had built his empire on reading rooms, and she was the only honest thing in it. If this story has your heart already, drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's see how far this one travels. The rain came down like it had a grudge. Clara Whitmore stood on the sidewalk outside the Meridian Hotel and watched water pour off the awning in sheets, soaking the red carpet, soaking the photographers crouched behind velvet ropes, soaking everything except the people who mattered. The ones being rushed from their cars to the entrance under the shelter of black umbrellas held by men in earpieces who never made eye contact with anyone. She had no umbrella. She had a borrowed dress, midnight blue, floor length, belonging to her coworker Dana, who was home with a fever of 102, and a safety pin she'd found at the bottom of her work bag, holding together a side seam that had split when she'd tried to squeeze into the back seat of the cab. The dress was one size too small and a decade out of fashion. It had a bow at the back that she didn't know how to tie properly, so she hadn't tied it at all, just tucked the ribbons in and hoped. Her heels were her own. That was the full extent of anything being hers tonight. "You going in or just decorating the sidewalk?" The man in the doorway was wearing a tuxedo and an expression that said he'd seen 1,000 women try exactly this and was tired of all of them. Clara looked at him, looked at the rain, looked at the gold-lettered sign above the entrance, Moretti Charitable Foundation Annual Gala, by invitation only. She had an invitation. That was also Dana's. "I'm going in," Clara said. She walked through the rain without hurrying. By the time she reached the awning, her hair was wet at the temples and her shoes had collected enough sidewalk water to feel like she was walking in a shallow stream. The doorman looked at her. She handed him Dana's invitation card. He looked at the card. He looked at her. He looked at the card again. "Ms. Dana Reyes?" "That's me," Clara said, and held his gaze long enough that looking away first became his problem, not hers. He stepped aside. The lobby hit her like a different atmosphere. Warm air, string quartet, the particular kind of silence that expensive rooms manufacture out of noise. Everything gleaming. Everything considered. Marble floors that reflected the chandeliers above them in perfect, unbroken ovals of light. Men in suits that cost more than Clara's monthly rent. Women whose jewelry was doing most of the talking. Clara stood still for a moment, just past the entrance, dripping quietly onto the marble. A server materialized at her elbow with a tray of champagne. She took a glass purely because it gave her something to hold. She didn't drink it. She'd been here for 30 seconds and already understood she'd made a mistake. This wasn't Dana's world either. Dana was the development coordinator for the Brooklyn Public Library system, not exactly a socialite herself. But Dana had been to these things before. Dana knew how to move through a room like this the way some people knew how to swim. Not elegantly, necessarily, but without drowning. Clara ran the children's department at the Sunnyside branch. She did story hours for 4-year-olds. She wore cardigans. She alphabetized things for comfort. But Dana was sick, and the invitation had been sitting on her desk, and Dana had called at 4:30 and said, "Clara, please, the library needs someone from the organization there. It looks bad if no one shows up, and there's a first edition Milne up for auction tonight. I know how you feel about that book. Just go, please, just go." And Clara had said yes the way she always said yes, which was by saying it before she'd finished thinking about what she was agreeing to. Now she was standing in the Meridian Hotel in a split dress that wasn't hers, holding champagne she wouldn't drink, surrounded by people whose net worth she couldn't calculate on her best day. And somewhere in this room there was a 1926 first edition of Winnie the Pooh that she'd been thinking about since Dana mentioned it on the phone. She started moving. The ballroom opened off the main lobby through a set of double doors flanked by men in dark suits who weren't hotel staff. Clara clocked that immediately, the particular stillness of them, the way their eyes tracked the room rather than the doorway. Security. Private, not hotel. The difference was in the shoes. Inside, the ballroom was enormous and deliberately intimate. The Meridian knew how to use scale, how to fill a vast space with enough warmth and enough crowd that it felt contained rather than cavernous. Round tables ringed a central dance floor. A stage at the far end held the string quartet she'd heard from the lobby. The auction items were arranged along one wall on velvet-draped tables with small cards and small lights, and the particular reverence that objects acquire when someone decides they are worth a great deal of money. Clara went to find the book first. It was the third item in the row, under glass. She'd expected that, but it still stopped her. The smallness of it, the worn yellow spine, the way the colors had faded to something softer than the original had probably been. 100 years of hands, 100 years of rooms and shelves and voices reading those words aloud to children who'd grown up and put the book down and eventually left it behind, and somehow it had ended up here, under glass, in the middle of a room that smelled like money and orchids. The card read, A. Milne, Winnie the Pooh, first edition, first printing, 1926. E.H. Shepard illustrations, near fine condition. Estimate, $85,000 to $110,000. Clara put the champagne glass down on the nearest flat surface she could reach without taking her eyes off the book. $85,000. The Sunnyside branch's entire acquisition budget for the year was $11,000, and that was before the city had cut it by 20% in the spring. She stood there long enough that it became strange, and she knew it was becoming strange, but she couldn't quite make herself walk away. "You look like someone just told you bad news." The voice came from beside her. Not the approach. She hadn't heard an approach, hadn't heard footsteps or the shift of air that should come before a person suddenly being next to you. Just the voice, low and dry, accented in that way that said English was completely fluent, but had been learned alongside something else. She turned. The man standing beside her was looking at the book, not at her, which she found strange because the line his voice had carried suggested he'd been watching her long enough to form an opinion about her expression. He was in his early 40s, maybe, though there was something about the quality of stillness in him that made age feel like the wrong category. Not old, not young, just settled, like a building that has finished its shifting. Dark suit, no tie. One button of his collar open in a way that read as deliberate rather than careless. His hands were at his sides, not fidgeting. Nobody at this party wasn't fidgeting in some way. "I just found out what it costs," Claire said. "The book?" "No, my mistake in coming tonight." She looked back at the first edition, but also the book. He finally turned to look at her then. She felt the attention of it without meeting it, waited a half second before she looked back at him, and by then he'd returned his gaze to the glass case. "You want it," he said. "That's a strong word for a librarian standing 6 feet away from $85,000 she doesn't have." "You're a librarian." "Children's section, Sunnyside branch, Queens." She paused. "You're going to ask me what I'm doing here." "I wasn't going to ask you that." "Everyone's been asking me that." With their eyes, not their mouths, but same question. He was quiet for a moment. Around them, the party continued its expensive murmur. Someone laughed too loudly 3 tables over. The string quartet shifted into something that was almost recognizable. "What would you do with it?" he asked. "If you had it." "Display it," Clara said immediately. "We have a case. It's not a great case. It's got a scratch in the glass and one of the hinges sticks, but it holds. Put it in the children's section where kids can actually look at it, not behind a rope. Right there." She stopped herself. "But that's not the kind of thing this auction is for. Someone's going to buy it and put it in a collection somewhere, and it'll be in better condition in 50 years, but nobody'll read it." She became aware mid-sentence that she was talking to a stranger at a party about children's library display cases in a way that was going to make her seem unhinged, and she stopped. "Sorry," she said. "I do that." "Do what?" "Talk too much about books." "You weren't talking about books." She looked at him then, fully. He held her look without expression. Not blank. There was too much in it for blank, but controlled. Like a man who had learned to want things without letting the wanting show, and had been doing it long enough that the control was the face. "What's your name?" she asked. Something moved through his expression. Not hesitation. Not quite. A recalibration. "Vincent," he said. Clara. She didn't offer her hand. He didn't either. Do you work for the foundation? In a manner of speaking. That's a strange answer. It's an accurate one. Clara looked back at the book. The estimate card. The small light above it that was probably doing more for the value than anything else in the room. I should go find a table, she said. I don't actually know anyone here, and standing in front of the auction display for 20 minutes is probably a sign. A sign of what? That I'm not supposed to be here. Everyone's supposed to be here, he said. The invitation said so. She almost smiled. Almost. That's generous. It's practical. He looked at her for one more moment. Measured. Quiet. The kind of look that was doing more work than it appeared to be doing. Enjoy the evening, Clara. She walked away. She found a seat at a table near the back, beside a woman named Patricia, who worked in hospital administration, and was also the only other person at the table who wasn't waiting to tell someone about herself. They talked about traffic. They talked about the weather, which was easy because the weather outside was genuinely terrible. The food came and was beautiful and too small, which Clara thought was probably the whole point. The speeches started. The man who spoke first introduced himself as the executive director of the Moretti Charitable Foundation, and he talked for 7 minutes about literacy programs and after-school initiatives and the importance of libraries to urban communities in a way that made Clara feel intermittently like she was being talked at rather than to, though she couldn't quite pin why. The second speaker was a city council member she recognized from the news. He was shorter in person. The third speaker walked onto the stage and the room changed. Not dramatically, not all at once. But Clara had spent enough years managing a children's reading room, managing the specific, mercurial, chaotic attention of 50 children between ages 3 and 10, to know what a room's attention feels like when it shifts, when something claims it. She looked at the stage. The man from the auction table was standing at the podium. He was talking about literacy the way people talk about the things they actually care about. Not the speech, not the language of the speech, but the thing underneath it, the actual belief that had built the speech in the first place. And the room was quiet in a way it hadn't been for the other speakers. Vincenzo Moretti, Patricia said beside her, in the tone of someone identifying something obvious. It's his foundation. Clara looked at Patricia. Sorry, Patricia said, reading her face. You didn't know? Clara looked back at the stage. She knew the name. Everyone in New York knew the name. Not necessarily in detail, not in the granular specificity of the tabloids and the business pages and the particular kind of dinner party conversation that happened between people who moved in circles that occasionally touched his, but the name, the weight of it, the way it occupied the space above certain kinds of news stories. Moretti, the old family, the foundation with the clean public face, and the rest of it that everyone knew without saying, the thing that lived in the white space between his name and his legitimate businesses, the thing that made those men at the door stand the way they stood. She looked at her hands. Her champagne glass was gone. A server had taken it somewhere in the last hour while she hadn't been drinking it. She had nothing to hold. On stage, the man she'd spoken to, Vincent, he'd said, which was not a lie but was not the whole truth either, was finishing his remarks. He thanked the attendees, he thanked the donors. He said something about the next generation that landed without irony and should have from a man like him, but somehow didn't. He stepped back from the podium. His eyes swept the room once, the automatic sweep of a man who had learned to account for every exit and every face in any room he occupied. And for 1 second, across the distance of the entire ballroom, they landed on Clara. She didn't look away, neither did he. Then someone stepped in front of him, and the moment closed. Clara sat with the specific discomfort of a woman who has just understood something she'd been in the process of not understanding and tried to decide how she felt about it. She decided, after approximately 30 seconds, that she felt like herself, which was not much help. The auction began at 9. Clara watched it from her seat and did not bid on anything. The Winnie the Pooh went for $94,000 to a man in a gray suit who didn't smile when the gavel came down. She watched him not smile and felt something flat and final settle in her chest. Not grief, she hadn't really believed, but the particular kind of disappointment that comes from watching the world be exactly what you expected it to be. She should leave. The event was winding toward its social third act, the open bar portion, The mingling portion, the portion where people exchanged cards and made promises they'd remember to keep for approximately 2 weeks. Dana had wanted a presence here, had wanted someone from the library system seen at the Moretti Foundation table. Clara had been that presence. She'd eaten the food, she'd watched the auction, she'd done the thing. She went to find her coat instead of leaving. The coat check was off a corridor near the lobby, and the corridor had a door to a terrace that was propped open with a rubber wedge. And through the door, Clara could hear rain and feel air that was cold and real and not recycled through 1,400 people's collective warmth. And she stopped walking toward the coat check and pushed through the terrace door instead. The terrace was wet and lit badly by the spillover from the interior lights. The Manhattan skyline beyond the railing was half obscured by rain. Blurred, brilliant, the particular version of the city that existed in weather and in almost night that Clara had always loved more than the clear sky version. The clear sky version was the postcard. The rain version was the actual thing. She stood at the railing and let the cold work on the back of her neck and the tops of her arms. Behind her, the door opened. She didn't need to turn around. "The coat check is back the other way," she said. "I know where the coat check is," said Vincenzo Moretti, and came to stand at the railing beside her. They were quiet for a while. Below them, 53rd Street gleamed with reflected light and moving water. A cab went through a puddle and sent a fan of water onto the curb where, fortunately, no one was standing. "You should have told me who you were," Clara said. "You didn't ask who I was. I asked if you worked for the foundation." I said in a manner of speaking. That was misleading. "It was imprecise," he said. "There's a difference." Clara looked at the skyline, the smear of light that was midtown above the weather. "It doesn't matter." "Doesn't it?" "I don't know anything about you that changes the conversation we had." She paused. "About the book." Something shifted in how he was standing. Not much, but she was close enough to notice. "What do you know about me?" "The name," she said. "The foundation. The rest is, I don't make it my business to know things about people who aren't my business. And I'm not your business." "You're the host of a party I crashed in a borrowed dress," Clara said. "So no." He looked at her then. She felt it the way she'd felt it before, as weight, as attention, as something that had made a decision to be directed at her and was not going to undecide. "The dress is borrowed?" "The whole situation is borrowed." She pulled the borrowed fabric against the cold. "My coworker was sick. She had the invitation. She has the right metabolism for this kind of event. I have the right stubbornness. Those aren't opposites. They feel like it tonight." The rain came down. Neither of them moved. "The book," Vincenzo said. "The Milne." "Don't." Clara shook her head once. "Please don't tell me it went to a good home or that the foundation will find a way to make it accessible or whatever the consolation is. I know what it is. I knew going in. It's fine." "I wasn't going to say any of those things." "Then what were you going to say?" He was quiet for a moment. The specific quality of his silence was different from the general silence of the party behind them. Denser, somehow. More occupied. "I was going to ask," he said, "what that book means to you, specifically." Clara looked at him. He was looking at the skyline, not at her. Waiting in the way of someone who has learned that waiting is often more productive than pressing. She looked back at the rain. "My mother read it to me," she said, "when I was 4. Before she went to work the night shift. That was our time, after dinner, before she left. 30 minutes of Pooh and Piglet and the 100-acre wood, and then she'd go and I'd fall asleep trying to keep the story in my head long enough to stay in it." She stopped. "She died when I was 7. The book she had was a library copy. I never owned one. Our branch has a 1958 paperback with half its spine missing. The kids who come on Thursday mornings, they deserve better than that." The city blurred in the rain below them. "That's what it means," Clara said. "Specifically." Vincenzo said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been. Not soft. The man didn't have a soft register, she could already tell that. But lower. More internal. "My father read to me too," he said. "Not that book. Different ones." "What kind?" "Old stories, things in Italian, folk tales with no moral except that the world is dangerous and you survive or you don't." He paused. less comforting than yours. Children's literature is deceptive about the danger level, Clara said. Pooh gets stuck in a hole eating too much honey. That's still a story about hunger and getting trapped. He looked at her again. This time she let herself look back. You analyze everything, he said. I work with children. You have to know what they're actually hearing, not what you think you're saying. She tilted her face up slightly into the rain. What are you still doing out here? Don't you have donors to manage? They can manage themselves for 10 minutes. You've been out here longer than 10 minutes. Yes, he said, simply. No elaboration. Clara let that sit where he'd put it. Below them the city moved, indifferent and constant, doing what it always did, carrying the enormous weight of 9 million lives without complaint, without pause, without the slightest awareness that two people were standing on a terrace in the rain, neither wanting to be the first to leave. The door to the terrace opened behind them. Mr. Moretti, the man's voice was controlled and carefully neutral. Senator Hatch is asking for you. Tell him 2 minutes, Vincenzo said, without turning. A pause. Yes, sir. The door closed. Vincenzo looked at Clara. Clara looked at the city. You should go, she said. It's your event. I'm aware. I'll leave before you have to worry about whatever this looks like. I'm not worried about what this looks like. You probably should be, Clara said. I'm very out of place. You're the only person here tonight who said something true, he said. That makes you exactly in place. She didn't have an answer for that. She was aware, uncomfortably, that she didn't want to leave. That she wanted to stay here in the cold and the rain and talk to this man for reasons she couldn't articulate cleanly, and that made her aware, more uncomfortably still, that she was not in a position to want that. Good night, Vincenzo Moretti, she said. She pushed off the railing and walked toward the door. Good night, Clara Whitmore, he said, behind her. She stopped, turned. He was watching her with that same contained expression, that same quality of controlled attention. The skyline was behind him, blurred and brilliant. I never told you my last name, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. No, he said. You didn't. Clara held his gaze for 1 second, 2. Then she pushed through the door and walked away. She collected her coat and left the building alone. Outside, the rain had let up slightly. A New York relenting, which was not a full stop but a reduction in hostility. She found a cab within 2 blocks, which felt like the city offering something back. In the back seat, heading over the bridge toward Queens, she held her coat in her lap and watched the water on the window and tried to determine exactly what had happened tonight that left her feeling like she'd walked into a room with all the furniture in the wrong place. Not uncomfortable, just disorienting. Not frightened, just unsettled in the particular way of something changed. She thought about the book under glass. She thought about the rain on the terrace. She thought about a man who had known her last name. The cab crossed the bridge. Queens opened around her, familiar and unglamorous, and exactly what it was, without pretense, without performance. She didn't sleep well. She didn't sleep badly either. She lay in the dark thinking about Thursday morning story hour and the cracked spine of the paperback and the 4-year-old named Marcus, who always sat in the front and repeated the words under his breath while she read, like he was memorizing something he needed to keep. At some point, she slept. In the morning, her buzzer rang at 9:15. She came down in her actual clothes, jeans, the gray cardigan, the kind of shoes that had seen pavement, hair still damp from the shower, coffee in hand because she'd had 3 minutes warning from the buzzer to the door. Outside was a delivery truck. Outside was a uniformed delivery person with a tablet and a neutral expression. Outside was a wooden crate approximately the size of a suitcase, packed in something that was meant to protect what was inside. The delivery person looked at his tablet. Clara Whitmore. Yes, she said. Sign here. She signed. She stood on the stoop of her building in Queens holding a coffee cup and looking at the crate while the truck pulled away. The crate had a shipping label with her full address. No sender address. She brought it upstairs. She set it on her kitchen table and looked at it for longer than made sense. Then she got a flathead screwdriver from the drawer under the sink and opened it. Inside, packed in archival tissue and custom foam, a 1926 first edition copy of Winnie the Pooh. Near fine condition. E.H. Shepard illustrations, the colors faded to something softer than the original had probably been. 100 years of hands. On top of the tissue, a card. 3 words and 2 initials. For the children. V.M. Clara sat down in the kitchen chair and looked at the card for a long time. Then she looked at the book. Then she looked at the card again. She thought about what it meant to accept something like this. What it said about her. What it implied. What it put in motion. She thought about the way his name occupied space in certain conversations. The things everyone knew without saying. She thought about the moment on the terrace when he'd said her last name and she hadn't told him what it was. She thought about Marcus, sitting in the front row, repeating the words under his breath. The book sat on her kitchen table in the morning light, small and old and exactly itself. Clara set down her coffee. She had a decision to make. Clara spent 45 minutes with the book before she made herself stop looking at it. She put it back in this crate. Not gently. She wasn't trying to be gentle. She was trying to be decisive, and the distinction mattered to her. She folded the tissue back over the cover with the careful hands she used for damaged spines at the library, which was automatic and which she resented, and then she closed the crate and put the screws back in by hand because the flathead screwdriver was already back in the drawer. She put the card in her pocket. Then she called Dana. Dana answered on the second ring, voice hoarse and medicated and full of a sick person's specific resentment at being contacted. "How was it?" "Fine," Clara said. "Listen, the Milne sold last night. I saw online, 94,000. It was delivered to my apartment this morning." Silence. "Dana, I heard you." Dana's voice shifted into something more alert, which probably cost her. "What do you mean delivered?" "Crate. My address, no return address. A note signed VM. Claire kept her voice even. She'd been practicing even since she sat down. "Vincenzo Moretti." More silence. Longer. "Clara," Dana said, "what did you do last night?" "I talked to him. Twice. For maybe 20 minutes total. I was just talking to him about the book. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't imply anything. 20 minutes. Not all at once, and I didn't know who he was for the first part." "How do you not know who Vincenzo Moretti is?" "I knew the name. I didn't know his face." Dana made a sound that was either the illness or frustration or both. "Okay. Clara, listen to me. You need to send it back. I know. You cannot accept a $94,000 gift from, I know, from a man who's—" Dana stopped. "You know what his foundation is." "Yes, and the rest of it." "Dana, I know." "Then you know why you can't—" "I said I know." Clara's voice came out harder than she'd meant it to, which happened sometimes when she was working against her own instincts. She took a breath. "I'm going to return it today. I wanted to tell someone first." "Tell me why you waited 45 minutes before calling me," Dana said, and her voice was quiet in a way that was worse than if it had been pointed. Clara didn't answer that. "Okay," Dana said. "Okay, go return it, and then come tell me about the gala because I've been lying here watching daytime television and I need something to survive on." Clara almost laughed. Almost. She hung up. She looked at the crate. She looked at the window, which showed a slice of Queens morning, gray sky, a neighbor's fire escape, the sound of the M train 3 blocks over. She put her coat on. Getting a cab with a wooden crate was its own negotiation. The driver wanted to charge extra. Clara told him what she was willing to pay, which was the fare and nothing else, and the driver made his feelings known through the particular theater of a man who has decided the meter is now a prop in his frustration. They crossed the bridge in silence. Clara held the crate on the seat beside her and watched the skyline assemble itself as they came off the bridge, and tried to plan what she was going to say. She didn't have a plan by the time the cab stopped in front of Moretti Tower on Fifth Avenue. The building was exactly what it promised. Tall, dark glass, the specific confidence of architecture that has been paid for without concern for the reaction. 2 men stood near the entrance in suits that matched the men from the Meridian the night before. The same stillness, the same quality of attention. One of them looked at the crate. One of them looked at Clara. "I need to return something," Clara said, "to Mr. Moretti." The man who'd looked at the crate said, Do you have an appointment? No. Mr. Moretti doesn't receive. I have a $94,000 first edition children's book in this crate that was delivered to my apartment this morning without my request, and I'm here to give it back. She kept her voice level. You can tell him that, or I can stand here until someone with more authority makes a decision. I've got time. The two men did the thing where they communicated without speaking, some combination of eye contact and years of working together. And then one of them stepped aside and reached for something in his jacket. She was inside within 4 minutes. The lobby of Moretti Tower was not what Clara had expected, which bothered her slightly because she'd been working to have no expectations. Clean lines, dark wood, a front desk staffed by a woman with perfect posture and the kind of composed expression that is a professional achievement. No excess, no performance. Just space and quiet, and the subtle communication that here, things were handled. She was guided, not escorted, guided, which was a more comfortable word for something that was essentially the same thing. To a private elevator, and to the 31st floor, and to an anteroom where a man in his mid-50s sat at a desk and looked at her with the expression of someone who had seen every variety of unexpected visitor and had an internal filing system for all of them. Ms. Whitmore, he said. Not a question. He'd been told her name already. Mr. Moretti will see you shortly. Can I take the... No, Clara said. Thank you. She sat with the crate on her lap. The anteroom was silent except for the sounds of the building doing what buildings do. A clock somewhere. The distant suggestion of other floors, other rooms. Through a window, the city was enormous and indifferent and doing its thing. Clara looked at the card in her pocket without taking it out, felt the edge of it against her fingers. The door opened. Vincenzo Moretti looked, in daylight and in his own building, like a man who had never once been unsure of where he stood. He was in a different suit, charcoal, precisely fitted, and his expression was the same one she'd catalogued the night before. Not blank, not warm, but occupied. Something running behind it that wasn't coming to the surface. He looked at the crate. He looked at her. You didn't have to come in person, he said. Yes, I did, Clara said. That's the kind of thing that needs to be said in person. He held the door open. She carried the crate in. His office was large and ordered, the desk near the window, the city spread out below it like something he'd had made to specification. She set the crate on the edge of the desk without being invited to, which he registered without comment. I can't accept this, she said. I know that's what you came to say. Then we agree. We don't agree, he said. He moved around to his side of the desk, not sitting, standing, and looked at the crate with an expression she couldn't read. I understand why you feel you can't accept it. That's different from agreeing. The distinction doesn't matter. It does to me. Clara looked at him. Mr. Moretti. Vincenzo. Vincenzo? The name sat strange in her mouth in the daylight. Last night it had been different. I don't want to be ungrateful. I understand that this is a significant gesture, but I'm a children's librarian in Queens. I can't receive a $94,000 gift from anyone, and I especially can't receive one from someone whose profile is what yours is. I work in a public institution. I work with children. The moment this becomes a story, which it will, I lose the thing I'm trying to protect. The library, he said. The library? He was quiet, not processing. She had the impression he'd already processed, that he'd been waiting for her to finish saying what he'd anticipated she'd say, which irritated her more than it should have. What if it wasn't a gift to you, he said. Clara stopped. The book goes to the library. Not to you, not as a donation to a person, but as a foundation-sponsored loan to the Sunnyside branch, for permanent display in the children's section. He paused. In exchange, you host a reading event. The foundation supports literacy programming. It's a partnership, not a gesture. That's the same thing repackaged. It's a contract, entirely different. You're moving the furniture around, Clara said. The outcome is the same. The outcome is that the book ends up where you said it should be. His voice hadn't risen. The outcome is that the kids on Thursday morning get to sit in front of something real instead of a broken paperback. That was your argument last night, and it was correct. I'm not interested in overriding your reasons. I'm interested in getting to the same place from a direction you can walk. The thing about it was that it was reasonable. That was the part that made her jaw tighten. Not the gesture, not the money, not even who he was. The part where it was genuinely, structurally reasonable, and she could feel herself looking for the hole in it. Why? She said. Why what? Why does it matter to you where this book ends up? You could donate the foundation's support to any library in the city. Any reading program. Why this one? Why me? Something shifted in the room, not in his expression that stayed level, but in the quality of the air between them, the temperature of the conversation. You were the only honest person in that building last night, he said. That's not an answer. It's all of the answer I have. He picked up a pen from his desk, not to write, just to hold, and set it back down. I spend a significant amount of my life around people who want something from me, or who are afraid of me, or who are performing some version of themselves for my benefit. You talked to me about a children's book for 5 minutes, and told me about your mother, and then went back inside without asking for anything. He paused. I'm aware that's not a sophisticated reason. It's not a reason that gets you off the hook for sending a crate to my apartment without asking. No, he said. That was presumptuous. That's a mild word. It was wrong, he said flatly. I should have called. I don't have your number. You knew my last name. I know a great deal of things that I've come to know through means that aren't standard, he said. Not defensive, just true. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Clara looked at him for a long moment. The city moved behind him, 31 floors below, doing what cities do. If I say yes to the partnership, she said slowly, the foundation's name goes on the display case. Not mine. The event is about the kids, not about the foundation, and definitely not about whatever the tabloids decide this is. Agreed. The library board approves the terms in writing. I'll have legal draft something today. And if I decide at any point that this isn't working for the library or for the community it serves, I can end the agreement without anything. His eyes sharpened slightly. Without anything meaning? Without you being difficult about it. A beat. Agreed. Clara looked at the crate. She looked at his face. She looked at the window and the city and the 48 hours of her own life that had brought her to a 31st floor office in a borrowed situation she didn't have a map for. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Neither of them seemed entirely sure what they'd just agreed to. She left. He walked her to the elevator himself rather than having the man at the desk do it, which was unnecessary and which she didn't comment on. They didn't speak in the anteroom. At the elevator door, he said, "My assistant will contact you about the paperwork." And she said, "Fine." And the doors closed. In the elevator, she exhaled slowly through her nose and counted to 5, and then counted back from 5, which was something she'd learned to do from a book about managing classroom behavior that turned out to be applicable to more situations than classrooms. The agreement was made. She told herself she was going there to return it. She was coming back with nothing returned and a foundation contract pending and a problem she hadn't known she had 24 hours ago and was now entirely inside. She thought, this is how it starts usually, not with a bad decision, with a reasonable one. The lobby doors opened onto Fifth Avenue and the October air hit her like scents. She stood on the sidewalk and pulled her coat tighter and tried to think about Thursday morning story hour, about Marcus in the front row, about the specific weight of a child who falls asleep in the book corner during afternoon reading hour and has to be gently moved. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hello? Ms. Whitmore. A woman's voice. Smooth, precise, with the particular music of someone who had learned to weaponize pleasantness. My name is Bianca Romano. I believe we haven't met yet. Clara stopped walking. No, we haven't. I was at the Gala last night. A pause that was too short to be natural and too present to be accidental. I noticed you speaking with Vincenzo. The word Vincenzo from this woman's mouth was a claim. Clara heard it and noted it without commenting. We were introduced, Clara said. He was hosting. Of course. Warmth that covered something else. I wanted to reach out personally because I think there may have been some misunderstanding about Vincenzo's intentions last night. He can be very warm to people at these events, very attentive. It's part of how he operates in these settings. I'd hate for anyone to read too much into... Miss Romano, Clara said. I'm on a sidewalk on Fifth Avenue. Can you get to whatever this is? A short silence. The temperature of the call dropped 1 degree. He belongs to someone, Bianca said. Pleasantness gone, clean and cold underneath. Not officially, but these things have been understood for a long time by everyone in our circle. Whatever impression the evening made on you, I'd encourage you to let it stay in the evening. Clara's hand tightened around her phone. I returned a misdelivered package, Clara said. That's all that happened this morning. Have a good day. She ended the call. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed. Her heart was going faster than she wanted it to. Partly anger, partly something she didn't want to name yet, partly the recognition of exactly the shape of the problem she'd just walked into. A problem with dimensions and history and prior claims that she hadn't known existed when she'd stood on that terrace in the rain talking about a children's book. She walked to the subway. She took the train back to Queens. She went to the library. The Sunnyside branch opened at 10. By the time Clara arrived, it was 10:40, and the Tuesday crowd was what the Tuesday crowd always was. A handful of retirees at the periodicals table, 2 women with strollers near the picture books, the man who came every day and sat in the corner near the reference section and never checked anything out and never caused any trouble and had been coming for 3 years, and whose name, she'd finally learned, was Harold. She nodded at the desk staff, went to the back room, put her bag down, and stood in the break room for 4 minutes doing nothing. Then she went to the children's section and looked at the display case. Scratched glass. Sticky hinge. The 1958 paperback, its spine cracked at the middle, turned spine out at the center of the case like it was trying to present itself with dignity it technically hadn't earned. She thought, the kids deserve better. She thought, everything is about to get complicated. She thought, you already said yes. Her phone buzzed again. Dana, this time. The Page 6 blog just ran a piece, Dana said without preamble. Clara's stomach dropped. What? Mystery woman crashes Moretti Foundation Gala. They have a photo. It's not great, Clara. They got you going in, hair wet, you looked like you, but in the context of the piece it reads as, what does the piece say? It's vague, for now. It says an unknown woman attended the event on someone else's invitation and was seen in close conversation with Vincenzo Moretti on the event terrace. Dana's voice was carefully neutral. Someone was on the terrace. Someone had a camera. Clara sat down in the child-sized chair at the reading table, which was not built for an adult and which did not care. Dana, she said, I know. I went to return the book. I believe you. I ended up agreeing to It became a foundation partnership, not a personal thing. She stopped. It made sense when he explained it. I know, Dana said more quietly. I understand how he can make things make sense. A pause. He's very good at that, Clara. It's something you should know about him. Clara looked at the display case, the cracked spine facing out, trying. Library board is going to see the piece, Dana said. Lena Greer already emailed me. She CC'd the director. What did the email say? It said, and I'm reading directly, is this the woman from our Queen's staff? What is our organizational position on staff members attending foundation events as uninvited guests and cultivating personal relationships with significant donors? The reading room around Clara was quiet. A child across the room was making a tower out of board books, building up, looking at it, knocking it down, building it again. Cultivating personal relationships, Clara repeated. Lena Greer has a gift for language, Dana said. Clara pressed her fingers against her eyes. The event was on your invitation. You asked me to go. I know, I'm going to say so. And the partnership. If Moretti's foundation funds a children's wing, that's a positive outcome for the system. That's not something that should... Clara. Dana's voice was careful. It's not the funding that's the problem. It's the optics. It's a photograph of you on a terrace with him in the rain and a Page 6 post, and now Lena Greer asking what our organizational position is. A breath. It doesn't matter what actually happened. You know how this works. She did know. She'd watched it happen to other people. The way a story, once in motion, doesn't care about the truth of the thing it's describing. The way an image accumulates meaning from context rather than content. The way institutions panic. What do I do? She said. Right now? Nothing. Let me handle Lena. Don't call Vincenzo Moretti. Don't post anything. Don't explain yourself to anyone. Dana paused. How many people know about the delivery this morning? You, me, his building staff, his assistant, presumably. Okay, Dana was thinking. Clara could hear it. If the partnership paperwork goes through the board officially, that's clean. That's legitimate. That's the library system receiving a donation, not you receiving a gift. Keep that separation clear. I already made that argument to him. Good. Keep making it. Dana exhaled. You're going to be fine. It's page 6, not the Times. It'll cycle. Clara didn't answer. Because the thing was, she'd seen how these cycles worked. The first story is vague. The second story has more details. The third story has someone willing to go on record with something just plausible enough to be printed. And at some point in that cycle, the thing you're protecting, the reading program, the Thursday morning story hour, the kids who build towers out of board books and knock them down, gets collateral. She thought about Bianca Romano's voice on the phone. He belongs to someone. Not a warning, a territorial declaration, the kind that came with resources. She thought, I went to a party in a borrowed dress and came home with someone else's war. Outside the children's section window, the Queen's afternoon was doing what it always did. Loud, dense, unheroic, real. A bus going by. The apartment building across the street with its fire escapes and its satellite dishes and its complicated lives stacked floor by floor. Clara looked at the display case. She thought about what she'd already set in motion. She thought, there's no version of this where you walk back to the door and close it. Her email notification chimed. A message from an address she didn't recognize. Subject line reading only. The terms, as discussed. She opened it. A PDF. 6 pages. The Moretti Foundation letterhead at the top. Her name, the library's name. The terms exactly as she'd stated them. The book, the display, the reading event, the board approval clause, the termination option. Clean, precise, everything she'd asked for. At the bottom, a handwritten signature in a scanned image. Below it, a second line. Not part of the formal terms, just a note in the same hand. I told you it was a contract, not a gesture. Clara stared at the screen. Then she forwarded the email to Dana, to the library director, and to the board chair with a subject line that read, Moretti Foundation Partnership. Please review. She set her phone down on the reading table. Across the room, the child knocked the board book tower down and looked at the pieces for a moment, deciding, then started building again. The board approved the partnership on a Thursday, not unanimously. Lena Greer voted no and made sure everyone in the room understood the texture of her no, the long pause before she said it, the way she set her pen down first, the particular quality of her expression that said she was recording this moment for later use. But the director said yes, and the majority said yes, and the partnership terms went through with the Moretti Foundation letterhead and the 6-page PDF and the handwritten signature at the bottom. Clara was not in the room for the vote. She'd been asked not to be, which she understood was procedurally appropriate and which she resented anyway. In the private way, she resented most things that were simultaneously correct and uncomfortable. Dana called her when it was done. 4-1, Dana said. You're official. Lena? Lena. A pause. She's not done, you know that. I know that. She said, and this is the direct quote. I wrote it down because I knew you'd want the exact words. She said, I want it on record that this institution is taking on a relationship whose long-term reputational cost has not been fully assessed. Clara was quiet. She's not wrong as a procedural matter, Dana said. She's just using procedure as a weapon, which is different. I know the difference, Clara said. She did. The next 2 weeks were the kind of busy that doesn't leave room for thinking, which Clara chose to interpret as useful. The Foundation's events coordinator, a woman named Sylvia who communicated exclusively by email and had a response time of under 4 minutes at all hours of the day, sent 17 messages in the first week alone, each one containing attachments, suggested timelines, vendor contacts, and the particular organizational energy of someone who had been told to make something happen by someone whose instructions were not questioned. The event took shape the way things take shape when money is applied to them, quickly, cleanly, without the usual friction of a budget that requires negotiation at every step. Clara had run story hours for 6 years on a shoestring so thin it was more metaphor than material. Watching logistics resolve themselves was disorienting in the way of all abundance after scarcity. The brain keeps anticipating the obstacle that doesn't come. She didn't speak to Vincenzo directly in those 2 weeks. His name appeared on emails in the CC line. His foundation's logo appeared on the draft event materials that Sylvia sent for approval. That was the extent of it, and Clara had decided that was appropriate and correct, and also did not spend time thinking about the terrace in the rain. She spent the time doing her job. Thursday morning story hour, the afternoon reading groups, the homework help sessions that happened in the corner of the children's section every day between 3 and 5, which were technically informal, but which Clara had been running with the consistency of a class for 4 years because the kids who came needed the consistency more than they needed the formality. The event was scheduled for the second Saturday in November. On the Monday before, the second story ran. Not page 6 this time. A mid-level tabloid site with a larger following and a writer who had clearly done some actual work, meaning they'd found sources willing to talk, which was worse than vague photographs from a distance. The headline read, Moretti's Mystery Librarian, Gold Digger or Calculated Play. Clara read it on her phone in the break room with her coat still on because she'd just come in and hadn't had time to put her bag down. The piece had details, specific details. The content of the foundation partnership, framed as a library employee leveraging a chance encounter into a 6-figure institutional benefit. A quote from a source familiar with the Moretti Foundation's philanthropic operations saying that the donation process had bypassed standard review channels. A quote from a colleague at the library system saying that the connection between the librarian and the donor had raised questions about professional ethics. A colleague. Clara read that line twice. She set her phone face down on the break room table and stood very still for a moment with her hands flat on the surface, feeling the cold of it through her palms. Then she picked her phone back up and called Dana. Dana answered immediately. I saw it. The colleague, quote, Clara said. I know. Dana, who? I don't know yet. Dana's voice was tight, controlled. It wasn't me. I want to be clear. I know I'm the one who knew the details, but it wasn't me. I know it wasn't you. Lena knew the terms. She was in the board meeting. Clara thought about Lena Greer setting her pen down before voting no. The quality of that gesture, the patience in it. Does Lena know Bianca Romano? Clara asked. Silence. Donna. I don't know, Dana said. I genuinely don't know, but I'll find out. The quote about bypassing standard review channels, Clara said. That's not accurate. Every step went through the board. I know that, but it doesn't matter if it's printed. It matters to me. I know it does. Dana exhaled. Clara, the library director is going to call you today. She's going to ask you to consider whether your continued involvement with the event is in the institution's best interest. The words landed like something dropped from a height, not fast. Clara heard each one arrive separately. She's going to ask me to step back, Clara said. She's going to frame it as a question, but yes. Clara looked at the break room wall, the staff schedule pinned there, her name in the Tuesday and Thursday columns in the children's section. 4 years of Tuesday and Thursday columns. The event is in 5 days, she said. I know. The kids have been talking about it for 2 weeks. Marcus has been... She stopped. Marcus has been practicing reading aloud in the reading groups. He told me he wants to read a page. He's 6. He can't technically read yet, but he's been memorizing the first page from the sample copy I showed him. Dana was quiet. I'm not stepping back, Clara said. Clara? I'm not. The director called at 11:15 as Dana had predicted. Her name was Ruth Calloway, and she was a woman of 62 who had spent 30 years in library administration and who had a reputation for measured language and careful institutional management, and who said, precisely as Dana had said she would, Clara, I want to ask you to consider whether your continued visible role in this event serves the library's interests right now. Clara sat in the director's office. Ruth had called and then said, Can you come in? And Clara had come in and looked at Ruth's desk and the careful arrangement of things on it and said, I'd like to make the case that it does. Ruth listened. She was good at listening, the kind of listening that is entirely present and entirely noncommittal, that receives everything and reveals nothing about what it plans to do with what it receives. Clara made her case. The kids, the Thursday mornings, the specific investment of the community in this particular event. The fact that stepping back now, publicly, would be read as confirmation of the tabloid's framing rather than a refutation of it. The fact that Lena Greer's vote against the partnership was on record, and that a colleague appearing as an anonymous source in a hit piece 2 weeks later was a pattern worth examining. Ruth listened to all of it. Then she said, "The board chair has received a letter." Clara stopped. "This morning," Ruth said, "from an attorney representing Bianca Romano." She folded her hands on the desk. The letter alleges that the Sunnyside Branch partnership was arranged as a result of an improper personal relationship between a staff member and a foundation donor, and that the library system failed in its duty of care by approving the terms without independent review. She paused. The letter requests that the library system suspend the partnership pending an ethics review, and that the staff member in question be placed on administrative leave during that review. The room was very quiet. "Administrative leave," Clara said. "It's a request, not a determination. The board has not acted on it. Yet." Ruth looked at her steadily. "Yet," she acknowledged. Clara's hands were in her lap. She was aware of them the way you become aware of your hands when there's nothing useful for them to do, and the rest of you is trying to manage something that hands can't help with. "Bianca Romano sent a legal letter to the board chair," Clara said slowly, "because I talked to a man at a party. Because a man sent a valuable item to your home address, and because you subsequently entered into an institutional agreement with his foundation, and because there is now a tabloid record suggesting the sequence was irregular." Ruth's voice was not unkind. It was careful. "I know what actually happened, Clara. I believe you about what actually happened, but what I know and what I can defend to an attorney are two different things." "What do you need me to do?" Clara said. Ruth looked at her for a moment. "I need you to be honest with me. Is there anything about your interactions with Vincenzo Moretti that is anything that would look different under scrutiny than it looks right now? The terrace, the rain, the specific weight of a conversation that had been honest in a way most conversations aren't." "No," Clara said. "Nothing personal. Nothing." "No," Clara said again. Steadier. Ruth held her gaze. Then she nodded once, accepting it. "Then here's what I'm going to do," Ruth said. "I'm going to respond to the attorney's letter by stating that the partnership was approved by the full board following standard review procedures, which is factually accurate. I'm going to recommend against administrative leave on the grounds that there is no evidence of misconduct, only allegation. And I'm going to ask you to reduce your public visibility around the event for the next 5 days so that the story has less material to work with." "Reduce my visibility," Clara said. "Let Sylvia's team handle the publicity. Let the foundation's communications people front the press materials. Don't do interviews. Don't post on personal social media. Show up to the event, do your job, and let the work speak." It wasn't what Clara had wanted to hear. It was also reasonable, and she'd run out of arguments against reasonable things. "Okay," she said. She left the director's office and went back to the children's section and sat in the small chair at the reading table again, which still didn't fit her and still didn't care, and thought about the shape of the week ahead. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, different from Bianca's. She answered. "Ms. Whitmore." A man's voice, smooth but with the underlying cadence of someone reading from prepared language. "I'm calling on behalf of Ms. Romano regarding—" "I've already heard from Ms. Romano's attorney," Clara said. "Any further communication should go to the library's legal—" "This isn't from the attorney," the voice said. "This is a personal communication." Clara waited. "Ms. Romano would like to meet with you, today if possible. She believes there are aspects of the current situation that you may not be fully aware of, and that a direct conversation would be beneficial before the event on Saturday." "Beneficial to whom?" A pause. "To you, primarily." Clara thought about this for approximately 3 seconds. She thought about the word beneficial from a woman who had sent a legal letter to a library board chair on a Monday morning. She thought about what Bianca Romano could possibly know that Clara didn't, and whether the knowing of it would change anything that was already in motion. She thought, "You're already inside it. Running doesn't make the walls go away." "Where?" she said. They met at a hotel bar on the Upper East Side at 4 o'clock, which Clara understood as a choice. Not Bianca's apartment, not somewhere Bianca worked, but a neutral space with witnesses, which said something about how Bianca had assessed her. Not a threat. An audience. Bianca Romano was exactly what the name had prepared Clara to expect. Late 30s, immaculate, the particular elegance of a woman who had never had to make peace with being less than well-resourced. Dark hair, dark coat, a posture that occupied space without apology. She was sitting at the bar when Clara arrived, with a drink she hadn't touched, and she looked at Clara the way people look at things they've been deciding how to handle. "Thank you for coming," Bianca said. "You implied I had things to learn," Clara said. "I learn things when I can." A server appeared. Clara ordered water. Bianca waited for the server to leave. "I want to be direct with you," Bianca said. "I'd appreciate that. Vincenzo Moretti is not a safe man to be attached to." She said it flatly, without drama, the way someone states a fact they've had time to accept. "I don't mean that as a warning from a jealous woman. I mean it as information from someone who has known him for 15 years and who understands what proximity to his life costs." Clara looked at her. "Then why do you want to be his wife?" Something moved through Bianca's face. "That's a complicated question. You told me on the phone he belongs to someone." That sounded unambiguous. "What I feel about Vincenzo and what I'm telling you right now are separate things." She picked up her glass and set it back down without drinking. "The tabloid piece from this morning. I didn't plant that." Clara waited. "Lena Greer did." Bianca held her gaze. "Your colleague on the library board. She reached out to a journalist she knows 3 days ago. I know because the journalist is someone I've worked with before, and he mentioned it." She paused. "I want you to understand that the attack on your professional standing didn't come from me. It came from inside your institution." The bar around them was doing its afternoon thing. Quiet. A few people, the low sound of piped music that was trying not to be noticed. Clara sat with what Bianca had just said and felt it rearrange things in her chest in a way that was not comfortable. "The attorney's letter," Claire said. "That was yours?" "Yes." "So you're telling me you didn't do one thing while admitting you did the other thing." "The letter was a protective measure for Vincenzo, not against you." Bianca's voice was controlled, but something underneath it was working, something that cost more than the smooth surface suggested. "I've been managing the public interface of his life for a long time. When photographs appear, when stories start, when women—" She stopped. "When situations develop, I manage them. That's what I do." "That's a strange thing to do for someone you're not officially with." "It's a strange life." Bianca looked at her drink. "The letter wasn't designed to destroy you. It was designed to create procedural distance, to give the library system grounds to separate itself from the connection before it became something worse." "Something worse than a legal letter requesting my administrative leave?" "Something worse than that, yes." Bianca looked up. "There are people in Vincenzo's world who don't manage problems with letters to boards of directors. You understand what I'm saying?" The cold came in then. Not the room temperature, something internal. Clara felt it settle in the space between her shoulders and the back of her neck and stay there. "You're telling me I'm in danger," Clara said. "I'm telling you that Vincenzo's enemies are not abstract," Bianca said, "and that a woman who appears publicly connected to him, photographed with him, named in the press in relation to him, attached to an institutional agreement that carries his foundation's name, is visible. And visible means findable. And findable means..." "Means what?" Clara said. Her voice was level. She was making it level. "Last night," Bianca said, "someone accessed the Sunnyside branch's staff scheduling database. I don't know who. I know it happened because I have people who monitor certain channels, and the library system's administrative network showed an unauthorized query against staff records." She held Clara's gaze. "Your home address is on file with your employer." The floor of the bar did not actually move. Clara was aware of this, was aware that she was sitting still, that her hands were steady, that nothing external had changed in the 10 seconds since Bianca had said those words. "My address," Clara said. "Your address, your schedule, your emergency contact information." Bianca's voice had gone quieter. Whatever she was underneath the management and the posture, it was more honest than the surface. "Clara, whatever you think of me, and I don't expect you to think well of me, I am not here to hurt you. I'm here because Vincenzo doesn't know this happened yet. And when he finds out, and he will find out, probably today, the way he reacts is going to make this significantly more complicated for everyone." Why are you telling me instead of him? Because he will protect you in ways that will make you more visible, not less, Bianca said. And because I think you are a person who deserves the chance to make a decision about your own safety before someone else makes it for you. The music in the bar changed to something else. A couple sat down 2 stools away, laughing about something private. Clara looked at the water in front of her that she hadn't touched. She thought about her address on a form in a database. She thought about the event on Saturday and Marcus practicing the first page and the scratch in the display case glass. She thought about Ruth Calloway saying, "Reduce your public visibility," and Lena Greer's pen going down before the vote. She thought about standing on a terrace in borrowed dress and a broken seam, talking about her mother to a man she thought was ordinary. She said, "What do you want me to do?" Bianca looked at her for a long moment. "I want you to cancel the event," she said, quietly. "Let the partnership dissolve. Let the book go back to the foundation's storage. Walk away from this before—" Clara's phone lit up on the bar in front of her. The name on the screen was Vincenzo Moretti. Both women looked at it. Clara looked at Bianca. Bianca's face had gone very still. The stillness of someone who has just watched a calculation fail in real time, who is already running the new numbers. Clara picked up the phone. "Clara?" His voice was different from any version of it she'd heard before. Stripped, tight, the control she'd cataloged still present, but thinner now, like a wire under too much Clara. His voice was different from any version of it she'd heard before. Stripped, tight, the control she'd cataloged still present, but thinner now, like a wire under too much current. "Where are you right now?" Not a question. The syntax of a question without the inflection of one. "Upper East Side," she said. "A bar called the Alderton." A pause that was 1 second long and contained a great deal. "Is Bianca with you?" Clara looked at Bianca. Bianca was looking at the bar surface with the expression of a woman recalculating. "Yes," Clara said. The sound that came through the phone was not quite a word. "Don't leave that bar. I'll be there in 12 minutes. The call ended. Clara set the phone down. Bianca picked up her drink and finally took a sip and set it back down with the precision of someone who needed something to do with their hands. "He knew where you were," Clara said. "He knows where I generally am." Bianca's voice was flat. "That's part of the arrangement." "What arrangement?" Bianca looked at her. "The one I've been trying to explain to you. The one that doesn't have a clean name because it was never supposed to need one." She straightened her coat. "He's going to be angry." "At you?" "At everything." She paused. "He doesn't like it when variables he didn't account for appear in the same physical space without his knowledge. It makes him feel—" She stopped, chose the word with care. "Outmaneuvered." They waited. Clara drank her water. The couple 2 stools down were still laughing. The bartender polished a glass with the profound professionalism of someone who had learned not to register the temperature of the conversations around him. 11 minutes. Vincenzo walked through the door of the Alderton looking like a man who had left somewhere in a hurry and had not slowed down for the transition. No bodyguards, or rather 2 men who came in 30 seconds behind him and stationed themselves near the entrance with the practiced invisibility of people who were very present and not meant to be noticed. His suit jacket was on, but the collar she'd first seen him in. Open 1 button, deliberate, was 2 buttons open now and not deliberate. Something had been happening before this. He came directly to the bar. He looked at Clara first, a fast, assessing look, the kind that is checking for damage before it checks for anything else. And then he looked at Bianca with an expression that was controlled the way a fire is controlled, contained, but the heat was there, and the heat was not small. "Vincenzo," Bianca started, "did you access the library's staff database?" Not loud. Quieter than normal, actually, which was worse. Bianca's jaw tightened. "I had someone monitor." "Did you access it?" "I had someone run a query to determine whether—" "Bianca." The word was a wall. She stopped. "Did you tell someone to access that system?" A pause. "Yes." Clara watched Vincenzo's face do the thing she'd seen it do once before. On the terrace, when she told him about her mother and the book and the 30 minutes before the night shift. The recalibration. Except this one went in a different direction. "You went into a public library's administrative system," he said, "and pulled a private employee's personal information. He was not looking at her now. He was looking at the bar surface between them. Because you decided that was a proportionate response. I decided it was a necessary. You could have come to me. His voice had dropped further. You have my number. You have had my number for 15 years. If there was a threat assessment you felt needed to be made, you come to me first. That is how this works. That has always been how this works. He finally looked at her. Instead, you scared her. I informed her, Bianca said. You walked up to a woman who is not part of my world, who has done nothing except talk to me at a party, and you laid out a threat landscape and told her to cancel the event and walk away. He paused. What did you think that would accomplish? I thought it would protect her. And here something cracked slightly in Bianca's voice. Not much, barely audible, but Clara heard it. I thought if she understood the actual risk, she would make the intelligent choice before you got involved, and made it impossible for her to make any choice at all. Silence. The bartender had found something to do at the far end of the bar. The database access, Claire said. Both of them looked at her. She hadn't spoken since Vincenzo arrived, and the weight of the conversation had pulled attention away from her as subject and toward them as combatants. She'd let it. She'd been watching and cataloging and deciding. My home address was in that query, Clara said. Whoever you sent to run it, did they copy anything? Store anything? Bianca's expression shifted. No, it was a read query only. I wanted to know the exposure level, not, was the person you use someone who reports exclusively to you, Clara said, or someone who works across multiple interests? A very specific silence. Bianca looked at Vincenzo. Vincenzo looked at Clara with the expression of a man who has just reassessed something he thought he'd already assessed correctly. That's the right question, he said quietly. I have a 6-year-old who has been practicing reading a page aloud for 2 weeks, Clara said. His name is Marcus, and he can't technically read yet, but he's been memorizing the text because he wants to do it at the event on Saturday. If someone with bad intentions toward you now has my home address because the person Bianca hired has divided loyalties, I need to know, right now, not managed, not filtered. I need the actual answer. Vincenzo held her gaze for a moment. Then he reached for his own phone and made a call. One sentence in Italian, too fast for her to follow, even if she'd spoken the language. He listened. 2 words back. He hung up. The man she used is clean, he said. The query didn't go anywhere it shouldn't have. You're certain? As certain as I can be in the next 60 seconds. He looked at her steadily. It's not nothing, but it's not what you're afraid of. Clara breathed out through her nose, slowly. The cold between her shoulder blades loosened by approximately 1 degree. Good, she said. She picked up her coat. Then I'm going to go home and prepare for Saturday. Clara. Vincenzo's voice stopped her without being loud. The situation hasn't resolved. There's still someone who accessed my employer's database. There's still a tabloid piece with an anonymous source inside my institution. There's still an attorney's letter requesting my administrative leave. She put her coat on. And there's still an event on Saturday that 37 children are expecting to attend, and a first edition book that has been approved by my board to go into our display case, and a community that doesn't get to watch this unravel because the adults in the situation couldn't manage themselves. She looked at him. Have I missed anything? She looked at him. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. Then I'll see you Saturday. She looked at Bianca, not with warmth, but without hostility either, the particular regard of someone who has assessed a situation and sorted its components accurately. Thank you for telling me. I mean that. Bianca blinked. It was the first time Clara had seen her blink in surprise. Clara left. Outside, the October evening had gone fully dark, and the Upper East Side was doing its evening thing. Dog walkers, taxis, the light from restaurants making yellow squares on the sidewalk. She walked a block before her legs started to feel the adrenaline working out of them, the specific weakness of a body that has been operating on emergency current and is now returning to standard power. She stopped at a crosswalk and stood with the light against her. Her hands were shaking, slightly. She hadn't let them shake inside. She put them in her pockets and waited for the light. Saturday arrived with the gray sky courtesy of a New York November. Not raining, not cold enough to deter, just overcast and still, in the way of days that have decided to get out of their own way and let the humans do what they're going to do. Clara was at the library at 7:30. The event started at 10. She rearranged the children's section 3 times. Not because it needed rearranging. Sylvia's team had come in on Friday and done an immaculate job. The display case freshly cleaned and the book installed with archival care. The reading area set with the right number of small chairs in the right configuration. But because having something to do with her hands kept the other part of her brain from running the scenarios she'd been running all week, Dana arrived at 8:15 with 2 coffees. "You look like you slept 4 hours," Dana said. 5, Clara said. Aspirational. Dana handed her the coffee. They stood in the children's section and looked at the display case. The book sat behind the cleaned glass in a way that was different from the broken paperback. Not because it was performing, but because it was simply there, present and real, the kind of object that has survived long enough to have accumulated a specific gravity. "Lena Greer resigned from the board last night," Dana said. Clara looked at her. "Effective immediately. No stated reason." Dana looked at the display case. "I don't know what happened. I didn't ask." Clara thought about Vincenzo making a call. 1 sentence in Italian, 2 words back. She didn't say what she was thinking. "Is Ruth worried?" Clara asked. "Ruth is Ruth. She's monitoring." Dana paused. "She said to tell you she'll be here at 10. By 9:45, the library was doing what libraries do when the community actually shows up. A specific productive chaos that was different from its usual daily rhythm, louder and warmer and more kinetic. Parents with children, grandparents, a few teenagers who had been brought by younger siblings and were trying to look appropriately disengaged while being genuinely present. The neighborhood. The reporters arrived at 9:50. Not the tabloid kind. Local news, community press, 1 camera from a Queens-based outlet. Sylvia had managed the press coordination and had drawn a clear line. No interviews with library staff, coverage focused on the event and the community, the Foundation's role framed as institutional support rather than personal connection. Professional? Appropriate. Clara was in the back of the children's section when she heard the door. She heard it because the room's ambient sound changed. Not dramatically, but the way a room changes when something has entered that doesn't match the temperature of everything else already in it. A specific alertness passed through the people near the entrance. She saw it move. Bianca Romano walked in wearing a coat that cost more than the library's monthly utilities. With 2 people behind her she hadn't bothered to disguise as anything other than what they were. She looked around the room with the careful assessment of someone mapping terrain. Then she found Clara. Clara held her position at the back of the room. Did not move toward her, did not move away. Let the distance stand and let Bianca close it, or not close it based on whatever she'd come here to do. Bianca came to her. "I'm not here to cause a problem," Bianca said, low enough for only Clara to hear. Around them, children were finding chairs. Parents were settling. The event's noise was rising toward its start. "Then why are you here?" Clara said. "Because I wanted to see it." Bianca's voice was stripped of the management. Just for a second, something underneath. "I wanted to see what it was that he—" She stopped, rearranged. "I wanted to understand what this is." "It's a story hour," Clara said. "For children." "I know what it is." Bianca looked around the room. The kids, the chairs, the display case with the book, the parents along the walls. The specific ordinary weight of a community gathered to do something small and important. "I've been in his life for 15 years. I've been to every gala, every foundation event, every board dinner. I've managed every complication. And I have never once seen him—" She stopped again. "Seen him what?" Clara said. Before Bianca could answer, the room's sound changed again. Clara looked toward the entrance. Vincenzo Moretti walked in alone. No advance team, no Sylvia, no suited men stationing themselves at the walls. He was in a dark coat over a shirt with no tie, and he looked like a man who had made a decision about how he was going to exist in this room and had committed to it fully. He looked around, found the empty chair in the back row that Dana had left when she'd gone to help coordinate near the entrance, and he walked to it and sat down. A 6-year-old beside him looked up at him. Vincenzo looked back. The 6-year-old offered him a crayon, apparently in good faith. Vincenzo took the crayon. Clara pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for 1 second. Then Marcus appeared at her elbow. Materialized the way Marcus always materialized, as if he had decided proximity to Clara was a navigational default and spatial distance was simply the problem before the solution. "Is it time?" he said. He was wearing a button-up shirt. Someone had combed his hair. He was holding a piece of paper that Clara recognized as the first page of the sample copy she'd shown him, which he had at some point taken home and which he had clearly been treating as a script. "Almost," Clara said. "Are you ready?" "I practiced 100 times," Marcus said. "I know you did." "What if I mess up a word?" "Then you'll do what readers do," Clara said. "You'll keep going." He looked at her with the specific gravity of a 6-year-old assessing whether an adult is telling him the truth or being kind in a way that is secretly about the adult's comfort. "Okay," he said finally. Clara walked to the front of the room. She looked at 37 children in small chairs, and the parents along the walls, and Ruth Calloway near the door with her director's expression, and Dana with her coffee, and Vincenzo in the back row with a crayon he'd been given in good faith. She looked at the display case with the book in it. She opened her mouth to begin. The front door of the library opened. Bianca, still standing near Clara, went very still. Clara turned. 3 reporters she didn't recognize, not the community press Sylvia had coordinated, were coming through the door with a camera and the specific forward momentum of people who have been told there is something worth filming here and have arrived with an intention rather than a question. Behind them, a woman Clara had never seen was on a phone, gesturing toward the room, toward Clara specifically. One of the reporters called out, not loudly, but loudly enough for the room to hear it, loudly enough for the children nearest the door to turn. "Ms. Whitmore, can you comment on the ethics investigation into your relationship with—" The room fractured. Parents looked up. Children turned in their chairs. The camera light came on, bright and invasive, sweeping toward Clara at the front of the room. Ruth Calloway moved toward the door with the expression of someone who had anticipated this and was now implementing a contingency. Dana was already on her phone, and 37 children were watching Clara to see what she was going to do. She felt it. The specific weight of 37 sets of eyes that did not understand the geometry of the adult situation, but understood completely that something had gone wrong, that the thing they'd been waiting for had been interrupted by something that didn't belong here, that the person at the front of the room who was supposed to tell them it was okay was the same person the interruption was aimed at. She felt Marcus somewhere behind her. She felt the book in the case to her left. She felt Vincenzo in the back row go very still in the particular way she'd cataloged, the stillness that preceded movement, the coiling before. And she turned her head just enough to find him and held up one hand, palm flat, directed at him. "Don't." He read it. He went still again, but differently. Not the stillness before action. The stillness of a man who has been asked to trust someone and is deciding whether to do it. Clara turned back to the room. She walked to the door. Not fast, not rushed. The walk of someone who has decided where they are going and what they are doing and is not negotiating either of those things. The reporter, young, hungry, the specific forward lean of someone who has been told a good story, is here and is not yet experienced enough to know the difference between a story and a room full of children, started again. "Miss Whitmore, the ethics board has—" "There are children in this room," Clara said. Quiet, level. The voice she used when a reading group was getting loud, and she needed it to stop without raising her own register. "You're going to lower that camera." "We have a right to—" "You're going to lower the camera," Clara said again. "And you're going to let me introduce you to someone, and then you're going to make a decision about what kind of story you came here to tell." The reporter hesitated. The camera stayed up for 2 more seconds, the operator assessing, the light still on, and then something in Clara's stillness, in the complete absence of panic or performance in it, made the calculation change. The camera came down an inch, then more. Clara turned back to the room. "Bianca," she said. Bianca Romano, standing 3 feet away with her coat and her careful posture and 15 years of managing complications, looked at Clara with an expression that was the most unguarded Clara had yet seen on her face. "There's a child in the front row who has been practicing reading aloud for 2 weeks, Clara said quietly. "He memorized the first page. He's 6 years old and he's wearing a button-up shirt because he thought today mattered." She held Bianca's gaze. I'd like you to sit beside him and help him with any word he gets stuck on, if you're willing." The room was completely silent. Bianca Romano stood in the silence for a long moment. The camera operator had the camera fully down now. The reporter's forward lean had collapsed into something else. The posture of someone who had come for one thing and found another entirely, and was still catching up with the difference. Bianca looked at the front row, at Marcus, who was looking back at her with the complete unself-consciousness of a child who does not yet know what a woman like Bianca Romano represents, who sees only a person being offered to him as help, who after a second's consideration held up his paper with the first page of text on it in the universal gesture of someone who has a job to do and would like to get started. Something in Bianca's face. Something in Bianca's face broke open. Not dramatically, not with tears or sound or any of the visible apparatus of a woman coming undone in public. Just a small, precise fracture in the management, the way ice cracks before it gives, a single line running through the surface that changes the structural integrity of everything behind it. She walked to the front row. She sat down beside Marcus. Marcus looked at her with the assessment of a 6-year-old who has not yet learned to disguise his evaluations, who looked at Bianca Romano's coat and her hair and her careful hands, and then looked at her face and apparently found something there that satisfied whatever criteria he was applying, because he held out the paper again and said, "The hard word is Christopher. I keep forgetting the H." Bianca looked at the paper. "Christopher," she said quietly. "The H is silent. You don't hear it. You just have to know it's there." Marcus repeated it under his breath twice. Then he nodded, the nod of someone filing information in a place they'll be able to find it. Clara stood at the front of the room and watched this happen and felt something move through her chest that she didn't have an immediate word for. Not relief, not yet. Relief required the danger to be fully past, and it wasn't fully past. Something more like the recognition of a possibility she hadn't been certain existed. She turned to the reporters. The young one was still standing near the door with his recorder in his hand, and the expression of a man whose story had changed shape while he was holding it. The camera operator had the camera at his side. The woman who'd been on the phone behind them had stopped being on the phone. "You're welcome to stay," Clara said to them, "as spectators. The story here." She looked at the room, at the children in their chairs, at Bianca in the front row with Marcus's paper, at Vincenzo in the back row still holding a crayon. "Is whatever you see. I'm not going to tell you how to see it." She turned back to the room. "Good morning," she said. "My name is Ms. Clara, and we're going to read a book." The story hour lasted 40 minutes. Marcus read the first page. Haltingly, precisely, his finger moving under each word, his voice gaining confidence in the second half of the page as the memorization caught up with the reading, and the two things merged into something that was almost fluent. When he finished, he looked up at Bianca, who had leaned in twice to help him with words. Christopher, and also poo sticks, which he'd looked at for a long time before asking. And Bianca said, "Good," in a voice that was not her managed voice, and Marcus nodded again with the same filing away nod, satisfied. Clara read the rest. She read the way she always read to the Thursday morning group. Not performing, not projecting, just inhabiting the rhythm of it, letting the language do what A.A. Milne had built into it 100 years ago, which was an understanding that children and adults were not so different in what they needed from a story, which was mostly just the truth that the world was large and uncertain, and you navigated it better with someone beside you than without. 37 children listened. Along the walls, parents listened. Ruth Calloway listened from near the door. The camera operator, almost involuntarily, Clara thought, the reflexive instinct of someone whose job is to capture what matters, raised his camera quietly and kept it there. When it was over, the applause was the particular applause of children, which is not synchronized and not restrained and is therefore more honest than most applause Clara had heard in the Meridian Hotel ballroom 3 weeks ago. She thanked them. She thanked their families. She gestured at the display case and told them what the book was and how old it was and why it was here, and she said that it belonged to the library now, which meant it belonged to them, which meant they could come look at it whenever they wanted. A girl in the second row said, "Can we touch it?" "Not with your hands," Clara said, "but you can put your face right up to the glass." This was apparently acceptable. Several children immediately stood to test the policy. The room broke into its natural end-of-event dispersal. Parents collecting children, staff beginning the gentle work of reconfiguring the space, conversations starting in the particular register of people who have shared something and are still inside the feeling of it. The reporters were talking to the library's communications contact near the door, which was where they were supposed to be. The camera had been turned off. Clara stood near the display case and watched the children press their faces against the glass, one by one, and looked at the book that had started this whole sequence, sitting there in the cleaned case with the archival care and the particular gravity of an object that had survived long enough to mean something to people who weren't born when it was made. Bianca appeared beside her. She was carrying Marcus's paper, which he had given her at the end of the reading, apparently as a gift or payment, or both. She held it with more care than its value as a piece of paper warranted. They stood together for a moment without speaking. "I owe you an apology," Bianca said. "You told me the truth when you didn't have to," Clara said. "That's not nothing. I told you the truth after I'd already done the damage." "Yes," Clara said. She wasn't going to argue the point. Bianca was quiet for a moment. She looked at the display case, at the children still pressing their faces to the glass. "I told myself for 15 years that what I was doing was protecting him, managing the situations that his life generates, keeping the machine running." She paused. "I think for a long time that was true. And then somewhere it became something else, and I told myself it was still the same thing." Clara looked at her. "The legal letter," Bianca said. "I'll withdraw it today. It should never have been sent to your board." "I appreciate that." "The tabloid piece, I can't undo that. Lena Greer's involvement, whatever comes of that, is not mine to manage." She folded Marcus's paper carefully along a crease that was already there. "But the attorney's letter is mine, and I'll handle it." "Thank you," Clara said. Bianca nodded. She looked once more at the display case. Then she walked toward the door, collected the 2 people she'd come with, and left without looking back. The room continued its dispersal. Clara became aware a few minutes later of Vincenzo standing beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. He stood where Bianca had stood and looked at the display case with the expression she'd catalogued in the beginning, the controlled one, the occupied one. But there was something different in it now, a quality of having arrived somewhere he hadn't been certain he was going to reach. "The crayon," Clara said. "I gave it back." "Was it a negotiation?" "He wanted to know if I'd been to the 100-acre wood." Vincenzo looked at her. "I said I hadn't." "What did he say?" "He said that was too bad, but that I could go in the book." A pause. He pointed at the display case. Clara pressed her lips together against something that was not quite a smile, but wanted to be. "You shouldn't have come alone," she said. "You knew I was coming." "I knew you were coming. I didn't know you were coming alone." "You put your hand up," he said. "You told me to stand down." "I did." "I stood down." "You did." She looked at him. "That surprised me. Did it? Men like you don't generally stand down because someone holds up a hand." He was quiet for a moment. Around them the room was thinning. A few families still lingering, Dana collecting event materials near the desk, Ruth speaking with the remaining reporters in the patient manner of a director closing out a media interaction. "Men like me," Vincenzo said. Not combative, just noting the phrase. "I don't mean it as an indictment," Clara said. "I mean it as a description of a certain kind of capability. You're accustomed to being the variable that resolves the problem. And you wanted to resolve it yourself." "I wanted to let it be what it was," Clara said, "without being resolved by someone else's force. This is a library. These are kids." She looked at the display case. Some problems shouldn't be solved by men with capabilities. Some of them should be solved by a 6-year-old with a paper and a woman who needed someone to sit next to him. Vincenzo looked at her for a long time. "I know," he said. "That's why I sat in the back row." The last families filtered out over the next 20 minutes. The reporters left. Ruth Calloway stopped beside Clara on her way out and said quietly, "Good work," which from Ruth was the equivalent of a standing ovation, and Clara received it with a nod that she hoped communicated how much it meant without requiring her to say so in a way that would make both of them uncomfortable. Dana was the last staff member to leave. She put her coat on, collected her bag, looked at Clara and then at Vincenzo, who was still present and had been helping, with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood physical work, moved the small chairs back into their daily configuration. Dana looked at Clara with the expression of a woman who had a great deal to say and was choosing to say none of it. "Call me tomorrow," Dana said. "Tomorrow," Clara confirmed. Dana left. The library was quiet in the specific way it went quiet at the end of a day. Not empty, not silent, but returned to its resting state, which was different from silence the way sleep is different from absence. The books on their shelves, the afternoon light through the windows making the particular geometry of late November, low and golden and short. Vincenzo set the last small chair in place and stood up. "There's something I should tell you," he said. Clara looked at him. "The Lena Greer situation," he said. "Dana told you she resigned last night." "Dana told me. She said she didn't know why." "I made a call," he said. "2 calls. I'm not going to pretend I didn't, and I'm not going to construct a version of it that sounds better than what it was." He met her gaze directly. "She was using her institutional position to damage you. I removed the institutional position. That is the kind of thing I do, and I did it, and I'd do it again." Clara held his gaze. She thought about the ethics of it, the clean line between appropriate and not, between protection and overreach, between a man using his capabilities because he wanted to, and a man using them because someone he cared about was being systematically targeted by someone with their own agenda. She thought about Lena Greer setting her pen down before voting no. She thought about the anonymous source quote in the tabloid piece. A colleague. "Was she hurt?" Clara said. "Professionally, yes. Physically, no." He paused. "I don't operate that way." "I know," Clara said. And she did know. She'd known it for a while, actually. Had sorted it out in the 3 weeks since the terrace. Had assessed the available evidence and reached a conclusion she'd been resisting because the conclusion was complicated. "You operate in a world with genuine violence in it, and you've done things I don't know about and probably would find difficult. And you used your capabilities this week in a way that bypassed due process and institutional procedure." She kept her voice even. And the outcome was that a woman who was deliberately sabotaging a reading program for children lost a board seat she was using as a weapon. "Yes," he said, "all of that is accurate." "I'm not going to tell you it was right," Clara said. "I'm also not going to pretend the outcome isn't what it is. That's an honest position. It's the only one I have." She looked at the display case, the book, quiet in the afternoon light. "What happens now?" "With what?" "With the foundation, the partnership, with—" She stopped, found the right words. "With this." He came and stood beside her, looking at the display case the way he'd stood beside her when they'd first looked at it together in the ballroom of the Meridian Hotel. When she'd been a woman in a borrowed dress who didn't know his name, and he'd been a man asking her what the book meant to her. "The foundation continues the partnership," he said. "The children's wing funding goes through the board the right way, which Sylvia is already coordinating. The book stays here." He paused. "That part is settled." "And the rest of it," Clara said. He looked at her. "I'm not going to tell you I'm a different man than I am," he said. "I'm not going to build a version of myself for you that only exists in this room and falls apart everywhere else. You know what my life is? You've known for 3 weeks and you're still here, which means you've made some kind of decision about what you can live with knowing." "I haven't made any decisions," Clara said. "You made several today." She considered that. "Those were about the library." "Some of them were," he said. "Not all of them." The afternoon light was changing, moving toward the early dark of November. In the children's section, the small chairs were back in their reading circle. The display case held the book in the clean, even light of its installation lamp. Everywhere else, the library was simply itself. The shelves, the carpeted floor, the slight smell of paper and old bindings that Clara had lived inside for 6 years, and that she associated with the particular comfort of things that stay. "My mother used to say," Clara said slowly, "that the reason poo works, the reason it lasts, is because it's honest about being small. About being a small creature in a large wood, uncertain about most things, getting stuck in holes because you wanted too much honey." She paused. "It doesn't pretend the wood isn't large or the holes aren't real." Vincenzo was watching her. "I'm a children's librarian in Queens," she said. "You run things I don't fully understand and probably shouldn't. Those are both true at the same time, and I don't know what you do with that." I don't know either, he said, but I know I've been standing in the dark of large woods for a long time, and I know what it felt like to talk to you on that terrace. He paused. I'm not asking you to fix that. I'm not asking you to be anything you aren't. I'm just telling you what's true. Clara looked at him for a long time. She thought about borrowed dresses and safety pins and library cards grabbed by mistake. She thought about the specific arithmetic of lives that don't overlap, the intersections that shouldn't produce anything and sometimes do, not because they're designed to, but because two people told the truth at the same time in the rain and something happened that neither of them had planned. She thought about the cost of it, the real cost, not the tabloids, not the attorney's letters, not the board votes. The daily cost of being adjacent to a world with real danger in it, the long arithmetic of compromise and clarity, and knowing which things you could hold on to and which things you had to let be what they were. She thought, you already know what you're going to say. She thought, say it anyway with both eyes open. Come to story hour, she said. Next Thursday. Bring nothing. No foundation business. No Sylvia. No event coordination. Just come and sit in one of the small chairs and let Marcus give you another crayon. Something moved through his expression. Not the recalibration she'd catalog, something slower and more complete than that. Like a room that has been closed for a long time and someone has finally opened a window. The chairs are very small, he said. Yes, she said. They are. I'll come, he said. The light in the library settled into its late afternoon register. Lower, warmer, the particular gold of November at 4 o'clock making the shelves look like something out of a story, which Clara had always thought was the library's best trick, the way it became more itself as the day ended. She went to the display case and looked at the book one more time. 100 years of hands, 100 years of rooms and voices and children growing up and putting the book down, and somehow it had landed here, in a scratched case with a cleaned hinge in a branch library in Queens that a foundation was now funding a new wing for, because a woman in a borrowed dress had stood in front of it at the wrong party and talked too much about something she cared about. She thought about her mother, the 30 minutes before the night shift, the 100-acre wood holding its small creatures in the particular safety of a story that knew the wood was large. She put her hand flat on the glass for a moment, not to touch the book. It was behind the glass, preserved, protected, belonging now to thousands of children she hadn't met yet. Just to mark the distance between her and it and decide that the distance was okay, that the glass was not a deprivation but a promise, that the point was never to hold it. The point was for it to be here, real and accessible and present in a room where a 6-year-old with a button-up shirt could press his face against the case and see it. She took her hand off the glass. She got her coat. She turned off the installation lamp, not the display case lighting, which stayed on after hours, just the overhead in the children's section. The room settled into its evening quiet, the book lit softly in its case, the small chairs in their circle. At the door she stopped and looked back once, the way you look back at a room that has changed, to fix the before and after in the right order, to make sure you're carrying the right version of it forward. Then she went out. Months passed in the way that months do when the work is real and the days are full. Not fast, not slow, but with the particular texture of time that has been used rather than waded through. The children's wing broke ground in February. The Thursday morning story hours continued. Marcus, by March, could read the first page of the book without the paper, without the memorization, just reading it, the real thing, the actual skill. The letters assembling into words, assembling into a world that opened when he looked at it. She told him it was because he practiced. He told her it was because the book was good. She let him have that. The Spring Literacy Gala, not the Moretti Foundation's annual event, but a citywide program that the foundation had co-sponsored, held in a community center in Brooklyn that smelled like floor wax and folding chairs, was everything the Meridian Hotel had not been, which was to say, it was specific and imperfect and full of people who had earned their seats by showing up rather than by writing checks, though some of them had done both. Clara stood near a display of children's artwork, drawings of books, of libraries, of the characters from the stories they'd been reading in branches across the city, rendered in the particular aesthetic of children who are depicting something they love and don't yet know they're supposed to be modest about the quality. She found the drawing from her branch, from Marcus, specifically. A bear, round and yellow, standing in a wood that was mostly brown crayon with green suggestions of leaves. In the corner, in letters that were now genuinely his, the label he'd written, "The wood is big, but poo is okay." She looked at it for a long time. Across the room, Vincenzo paused in the middle of a conversation with the city's literacy commissioner and looked at her. She felt it the way she always felt it now, as something familiar rather than new, the specific attention of a man who looked at her like she was the thing in the room that resolved the room into sense. She looked back. Neither of them looked away. The commissioner was saying something. Vincenzo answered without taking his eyes off Clara, which was either rude or fluent depending on your frame of reference. And Clara decided it was fluent, and she smiled. Not the almost smile she'd given him on the terrace in the rain, not the contained version, but the actual thing, unmanaged and present. And he smiled back in the way of someone who had not been certain he remembered how, and was finding that the muscle was still there. The room continued around them. The children's drawings on the walls, the folding chairs, the floor wax smell, and the particular music of a community gathered around something small and real and worth protecting. Marcus was somewhere in the room, she knew, having been brought by his grandmother, who came every week to afternoon reading hours now, and who had last Tuesday told Clara that the boy talked about the library the way most children talked about somewhere they belonged. The wood is big, but poo is okay. Clara looked at the drawing. She thought, yes. She thought, that's exactly it. She thought, that's been the whole story, from the beginning, which was a borrowed dress in the rain and a man who forgot to look away. Neither of them did. Not then, not now.